Today we have a special episode lined up as Jake sits down with Vadim and Glen to talk about their incredible journey to the Congo.
And he brought a box that had saw blades in it into the village, man. Like, that's a freaking journey.
They'll be sharing stories from their time in the heart of Africa. Everything from the challenges they faced in the remote villages.
The log was so heavy and the river is so dry that we couldn't float the log to the sawmill. So we disassembled the portable sawmill and moved it towards the log.
To the unforgettable people they met.
That's when I lost it in front of the camera. The bond,
And the inspiring work Glen has led over decades.
They don't have the resources or the possibilities to be able to earn any money. We in the West can help out with tuition, with education.
Get ready to hear first-hand accounts of how sawmilling, ministry, and adventure come together in one of the most fascinating places on Earth. Let's dive in.
We had an itinerary set. We had a plan to meet everybody from all over different parts of the world to arrive in Brussels, and from Brussels to enter Africa and then go to the Congo. I get to Atlanta airport and they say you have to deplane. My bag stays on the plane. I get off. There's a storm in New York. They said we can't go to New York. So they say, basically go figure it out. Wild story, Jake. But basically the fact that my travel plans were disrupted, I end up going to Paris, the Olympic Games, Paris 24. So I get to Paris and there's a 20-hour layover and they're like, we'll provide you a hotel, Olympic Games. I buy a ticket to get to see a game, Eiffel Tower behind me, and the beach volleyball court right there. And so anyways, because of all the travel explosions, my bag doesn't arrive to the Congo on time. I have like a fraction of all the things that I tried to provide for myself. And the bag of provisions that I originally packed in the States never arrives on time.
And that was supposed to be the easy bit, right? So David, you were in a separate group arriving to Kinshasa or Brussels?
Yeah, so there was a hurricane coming up the East Coast. That's what Vadim's talking about. But
Sure.
The weather didn't seem that bad when we took off from Raleigh, North Carolina. We were supposed to land in Newark to meet Glen and then on to Brussels. And we were approaching Newark and they said we have to divert because of weather. And we landed in Dulles. And I called Glen up and he says, well, I don't have any indication that our flight is delayed. I don't understand what the problem is. In the meantime, we were able to rebook on a Brussels Air flight to Brussels. And long story short, Glen's flight was delayed at Newark, but we got on the Brussels Air flight out of Dulles and arrived early in Brussels. And I lost my two suitcases, by the way, got lost in this process because we had to obviously deplane. But I had brought all my necessities and my carry-on, so I wasn't in the same situation Vadim was in. We got to Brussels to the terminal to board for Congo, and we thought we were supposed to meet Val there. So Nathan kept walking around. There's all these Congolese everywhere. He kept every white man that walked by, he'd say, "Are you Val? Are you Val?" Because Val hadn't been over there. I think they thought he was losing his mind. But anyway, Glen finally told us that Val was going with him on a different flight, and they'd be getting to Kinshasa later. And we ended up getting to Kinshasa on time and got transported to the MPH, which used to be a youth hostel, and spent the night there. And then the next day, of course, the other guys arrived. And we all made our flight on MAF at that point, which was the next day, which was a miracle because MAF, you don't just, any day take a flight to Congo. So it was a miracle we all got there from different routes on time to make the flight to Congo.
Glen, can you tell a little bit about what is the MAF really briefly, and then about just getting everybody into that flight and maybe a couple of the intricacies of arranging for a flight from Kinshasa to Congo?
Yeah, MAF stands for Mission Aviation Fellowship, and they've been working in Congo since 1960. Some of the About the time that MAF got started in South America, they also expanded to Africa. So I've been using MAF from my childhood. In those days, they had Cessna 180s, 206s. Now all they have is a Cessna Caravan, which is larger, and they don't have regular flights. They don't have a regular schedule. You make a reservation to go somewhere, and they accommodate you. And it was pretty expensive. So had we not all arrived on time, we would have had to make other arrangements, which would have been really expensive. And I would have been tempted to go by road, which would have been, in hindsight, pretty dangerous.
So
But
tell me a little bit about that. What was the issue of going by road? Because you can go by road, and typically you have mud or broken down vehicles to contend with bad road conditions. But what was specific about this issue this time for going by road? And it's what, a day or two drive over the 150 miles.
yeah, if you had a good vehicle, if you had a Toyota Land Cruiser, you could do it in a day. It's possible to take that road in a day. The two problems. One, it's the end of the dry season, so you have the most sand to contend with, and on roads that don't normally have smaller vehicles like the Toyota Land Cruisers, and only the big trucks, your road would be really messed up for a smaller vehicle, and you'd have a high center to deal with. But the main issue that concerned us was that the area that we had to go through had been overrun by these uh, delinquents who were intent on murdering people from a different tribe. And going to Kikongo was bad news because Kikongo is where they had stationed some of the military that had been after these delinquents. So anybody going to Kikongo would have a target on them as well. And so had we gone on that road, there would have been a few roadblocks. One run by the military who would have tried to exploit us, and then a roadblock by these delinquents who would have uh, threatened to kill us and then tried to extort a lot of money from us. And and they were they kind of had the run of the territory, so they could have stolen anything that they had wanted from us as well. So it's really the wild, wild west these days in that area between Kinshasa and Kikongo.
And that's not a big part of Congo, right? Just the distance between Kinshasa and Congo, because of the size of Congo is expansive.
Congo is huge. Congo is a third the size of the United States, and there's a lot of trouble in the east between Rwanda and Congo and all the different militias fighting over the resources. Our area of Bandundu doesn't have a lot of the resources, and we've always thought that that's protected us from these militias who are fighting over harvesting rights. So within the last 2 years is the first time that we've seen this um, uh, anarchy of intertribal conflicts because there was nothing to fight over before. But somehow people had it in them that they needed to do genocide on this one tribe, the Bateke tribe, who lives in our area. And so they were trying to control the flow of the one tribe, and anybody who was from that tribe would be taken off of trucks and executed on the spot.
Wow. So I'm glad you guys didn't drive, and it really highlights the actual danger of, and just um, the turbulent nature of these locations, right? And the
Yeah,
fact that you guys were able to come in for a week and leave,
Uh-huh.
and the people who live there, they have no way of getting out, and that's what they deal with on a regular basis, right?
Yeah. And we were
Um,
fortunate to have Mission Aviation Fellowship, which puts you above the fray.
right. So how was that flight, Vadim? Can you tell us a little bit briefly about the flight, and then what was your impression upon landing in Kikongo? What hit you guys once you guys landed?
What hit me is the smell when we got to Kinshasa, but
Okay,
Glenn can tell you why that is. The flight.
salt. What food did he have on the airplane? No.
I guess Kinshasa. I guess from the commercial flight, we landed in Kinshasa, got out of the airport, and there was just a stark craziness that I just couldn't stop filming. Val was making fun of me that I was filming with my phone and with my GoPro and trying to take pictures with the third camera, like I didn't have enough hands to try to share the experience of what I saw in Kinshasa, right? But then what you're talking about is now the next day we woke up and we went to the flight, the MAF flight, to go from um, Kinshasa, the capital, to the small village of Kikongo. And that flight was super cool to me because you usually, you know, I usually go on commercial flights and you don't see out of the windshield of the airplane. So I asked and was like, hey man, like I'd love to record Glenn from the front. And I was sitting there, just capturing the moment. Val was sitting next to Glenn. If we look at the airplane, there was the pilot Jacob in the front left. Front right of the airplane was my seat, so I had the headset. And then behind me was Val. To the left of Val, behind Jacob, was Glenn. And so we were trying to capture photo and video of Glenn's, experience taking it in. So that was profound because Glenn hasn't been there for a while, and Glenn, you recognized all the areas that we flew over, right? So I mean, I remember you asking some questions, but it brought memories back because you used to fly these areas.
Yeah, we've done that. David and I have flown that route for years and years and years. So we know all the rivers and we know the villages. And unfortunately, it's the dry season, which is really hazy. We couldn't see very well, but it was really fun to recognize the rivers. And I was trying to shout out to let you know what river it was and what village it was and what villages I had landed at in my powered parachute. So yeah, it was pretty amazing to that flight to be able to make that flight again. But just going back a little bit to the experience of leaving Kinshasa Airport and going through the city, uh, Val and Vadim were intent on filming, and I was really uncomfortable with these cameras hanging out the window, and the driver was really uncomfortable too with these cameras around because Kinshasa is really sensitive about cameras and filming, and you and there were points where the vehicle would be completely stopped, and these mobs of people, if they were discontent, if they had not wanted to be filmed, they could have mobbed the vehicle and try to pillage the vehicle. So there were moments when the driver would say, "Okay, pull the cameras in," but I think I was uncomfortable the whole way with the filming that was going on.
Well, the filming, to give a little bit of context, Jake, as we got in the vehicle, mind you, I never met Glenn in person. So I meet him first time when we walk into the airport, and he's exhausted, I'm exhausted, but I'm just like, this is happening. It's no longer on the screen, it's in person. We're here. And then Glenn, as we're driving, is telling us all these key moments about the everything. And I'm just like taking it all in. And you've got all the footage now, Jake, so you can go through it. But I mean, that's why I was filming. I couldn't stop filming Glenn speaking and then just taking a little bit of shots of outside the window. So
Next time to invest in a 360 camera that just captures everything at once.
that's it.
Um, yeah, our experience as well when I was working for Woodmiser was very much different parts of Africa. You were very, very cautious with using a camera. Parts of Africa, they're not very fond of getting their picture taken or things like that. Whereas other parts of Africa, like Zambia, oh, they will put on a show for you. Um,
Glenn, sorry, Jake. Glenn, can you point out why was there a really strange smell in the air and why was it so dark and why were there so many people on our route? Quickly.
Well, the infrastructure hasn't been improved at all since colonial days. And it was a city of under 1 million people, and now it's 15 million, and so you have the same roads as as back in the earlier days. It's the end of the dry season. Everything is burning. All the grassland in the interior is burning. The forests are burning. In the city, there is no garbage disposal, so all the garbage just gets burnt. So you're going just through this filthy, filthy smoke, and along the street, since there is no garbage disposal, everything just piles up along the street, and there is no more room for pedestrians to walk anymore. You've got the traffic, and then you've got the motorcycles, influx of inexpensive motorcycles weaving in and out. It was just total anarchy, total chaos, uh, driving in from the airport that night. And actually, since it was late at night, it was less traffic than normal. If we had gotten there earlier in the day, it would have been even more chaos. Uh,
What
yeah, so
time
there was
of evening was this? Like
um,
11, 9 p.m.
no, it wasn't that late. It was let's see, it was maybe 9 or so.
About 9ish. Okay.
Yeah, I think we got to
So
MPH about 10.
sure.
Yeah.
So we're approaching 45 minutes, and we need to land in Kikongo. And there's a lot more to unpack with Kikongo specifically. David, as someone who grew up in Congo, what was it like? What is it like to see the response? What is the response like when you guys land? When Glenn comes back and sees all his friends? When you as well get back to where you grew up?
Well, a bunch of people were there at Kikongo at the runway. The runway is right in front of the house I grew up in and the house Glenn lived in. So we're not talking like in the United States, but a bunch of people, a bunch of dignitaries. Most of them were there to see Glenn because, of course, he spent his life out there as a missionary as well. I had friends and others who I've known for years who were there to meet me, and it was just like a big family reunion right there around the airplane. And you've probably seen the pictures of everybody hugging and shaking hands, and it was just a good, getting to see each other again after a long time being away.
Glenn, how did it feel coming back? It's been a couple of years since you've been back, correct? 4 years, 3 years,
Three years.
3 years. So
Yeah,
how'd that feel coming back?
it was amazing. It was I've been dreaming about that for so long. In fact, when I left 3 years ago, I thought that it would be the last time I would be leaving. It was closure. But during these 3 years, my heart hadn't felt the closure. It there was something that needed to happen, and going back again showed that it was possible to get back. That there doesn't need to be closure. That it is possible, as difficult as it is. The way is still open to be able to get back to Congo, and that was amazing to be able to realize that, hey, this can happen again.
So, what about these dignitaries and things? So, in kind of that first day on the 10th, what were some of the things that happened on that first day? I have a few notes here that you guys were able to meet with some dignitaries. There's something about a spring, some red clay, and what were some of the kind of overarching aspects of that initial day of getting back into things? And maybe Vadim, maybe we can have you share from your perspective because all this is new to you, right? And Glenn is trying to like, oh, by the way, oh, by the way, oh, by the
Yeah.
way.
Jake, well, listen, we're flying, we land. I've never landed on a dirt runway like that. We get out, and the airplane turns around and leaves. We're off the grid. And then it hit me like, hold on a second, like, we're here and we made it. And then the thing started just happening. Like as the plane is leaving, children are running towards the airplane. Glenn, I don't think they've seen white people for a long time. So, it was very special for them, special for us. So I'm taking pictures with the kids. We're going through the village, and Glenn's showing us around. In fact, my perspective is very unique, Jake, because like I said, my bag that I packed with all my spare clothing didn't arrive. I have a picture of all that I had, took a picture of it when we landed because I didn't have nothing. Basically, my camera gear and a shirt and whatever. So Glenn said, let's go. So Glenn is showing us the village. We go to the marketplace, and Glenn's like, hey, like, you need to buy a cloth. And David's translating for me, and Glenn's translating. And then I buy this, bedside sheet looking cool little piece of fabric. And then Glenn's like, or David, whoever was translating, we got to this other guy who's the tailor. He like ran and taped down my arm, and he was like, we don't speak their language. So I'm like, okay, good, cool. So then we walk around the town and we go swim first time in the Wamba. I mean, Jake, it's just profound. Like I was taking it all in. I couldn't believe we're walking what Glenn was talking about. It's completely different to hear a podcast. I was the one interviewing Glenn on the podcast, and that was a profound moment. But walking where Glenn said is just out of this world.
So, Glenn, it sounds like it was a bit overwhelming for Mr. Vadim, not being able to go down to Walmart and pick up a $3 shirt, but needing to actually buy the cloth and get measured right there for his replacement. Glenn, David, is there something special about kind of like introducing someone from outside to some of the things that you take kind of for granted when you're there, or you kind of take as commonplace? What are some of the things that you then realize, oh, that's right. Yeah, this is.
Well, I just want to, regarding the cloth, there's some people who are affiliated with my family out there that my parents were supporting before they died, and I've continued to support since they died. And I was at the market to buy some cloths for some of these women that I support. And I'm haggling with this guy, and Vadim shows up, and he's looking at my cloth. And it's like, what are you doing? So finally, I realized he really wanted this piece of cloth. So whatever, I'll get a different one. But it was just, I didn't, at first I didn't understand why he was there too. All of a sudden he's right next to me, horning in on my business. You know what I mean? It was just like, what in the world?
And I didn't understand what David is talking about with the guy, so I thought he's negotiating on my behalf, and I'm like, I don't need two. He had two in his hands. I'm like, I only need one.
Yeah, I was. So I was buying this for these women, and then he's there grabbing my cloth from me. So anyway,
there wasn't much choice, but that piece of cloth that fit perfectly with the theme of Koval, of the woodworking with the leaves on it and all that. That was that just and that Taylor did such a great job with that shirt. But going back to your question, Jake, what impressed me walking around with my new friends was the contrast from Kinshasa. We were no longer in a filthy, smelly, big city that was so impersonal and populated, but here we were in back in rural Africa that was friendly, where the people were friendly, where there was space to move around, where we had a river and a forest, and it just felt so good to be back at home and back outside of the city.
So it was good to be back where there's no electricity, no running water, etc. That's what I got out of that. Um, I want to I want to kind of get to kind of the wood aspect. There's a lot of different things we could talk about, but I kind of want to start honing in on some of the wood aspects in the sawmill and why we talked about this in the first podcast, so I don't want to like belabor the fact, but as I understand it, to get lumber back in the day, in the 90s and late 80s, right? Glenn, you're there, you're trying to help the people, you're a Bible teacher, right, at the Bible school there. You're also trying to help. Each time you'd come back from the States, you'd bring some new project, right, to implement, right? Like something to better their lives somehow. And you come across this idea of a sawmill, you get in contact with Wood Miser. Wood Miser helps you get a sawmill out there. There's a missionary, or there's a guy that does free shipping, with containers that helps you get it out there. It was difficult for them to, there's trees everywhere, and yet they can hardly use it, right? The only thing that they can do is either go downriver hundreds of miles to buy very expensive lumber from a big, big mill that's wasteful and super far away, or they can fell a log and chip it out or pit saw it, right? As you filmed back in the 80s or the 90s of guys pit sawing. So you decide to bring back a sawmill. Can you, in a sentence or two, because we've covered it before, can you kind of say what was in your mind and what you thought might be the impact?
Yeah. Here we had trained carpenters, and there were building projects, but you couldn't get any lumber. I mean, you had to send a truck. Really, it was really expensive to have a truck bring up lumber from the capital city, and uh, the capital city is where the mill was, and it just didn't make sense when we lived in an area that had all the trees. And so my hope was that let's just make use of the trees that are around us, and let's provide a resource that we really need. And there was a tremendous need for lumber in our area because people didn't have chairs, they didn't have tables. Uh, Wood was scrounged. They would break down doors to make a coffin, for example. And that was in the days before the plastic company put out all this cheap plastic chairs and furniture. So there was a tremendous need for uh, furniture for use of lumber in that area. And someone else had told me about wood miser, and that's when I was able to do the research. And the year that I was in on furlough, I lived in Salem, Oregon, and in Portland there was a wood miser outlet there. So I got trained on the wood miser and decided what model to buy and what and had it shipped that year. That was probably 96 maybe.
So fast forwarding, and because if someone's interested, you can watch the podcast we did before, where we really ran into a lot of the details on some of this. Because I'd like to keep it on the trip itself. Um, so, but Glenn and David especially, what is one concept or big picture thing that you learned from the sawmill project that people can replicate other places where there are similar needs? It might be wood related or might not, but what is in your mind? Okay, from this project, we realize that this is a model that could be replicated, or a way of going about things.
What I learned over the years was we first went out with an LT-25, which has to be towed, uh, and we didn't have any vehicles to tow it with. So we would just have an army of guys that we would push it. We would roll it on wheels. But then we found out that Wood Miser has another model that's smaller, that you could disassemble the rail and you could carry piece by piece, and you could set it up then in the forest or along the river or whatever. And so Wood Miser gave us the opportunity to be able to adapt down to be able to get a smaller model, but still we could cut logs the same size. So that was a really practical model that we got, and that's what we went back to on this trip. 20 years later, that machine under tropical Africa conditions is still working.
It's amazing. So we get to August 11th, and it's Sunday, right? And you're having a Sunday service. You're meeting with pastors. There's a fixing of a generator, David, you're working on, correct? I'd like to hear a bit from Vadim about his impressions of the church service. And then David, as well, yourself going back there to Congo, worshiping with the church there, meeting with the pastors and friends that you grew up with. Just a few sentences from each about the Sunday services.
Jake, man, it's even hard to put into words the feelings that I had Look, I guess for context, I've been to a lot of churches around the globe, deep Siberia. I've been to churches in Europe. I've been to churches all over coast to coast in America. But once we spent a couple days in the Congo, we understood that literally these people are making bricks out of clay and building their mud huts, and the conditions that these people live in, I objectively have never seen people in a third world country, myself, this poor by our standards. And what was absolutely profound to me, to the point where forget cameras, I was so in the moment at that Sunday morning church service that my eyes just started filling with tears. Um, what I saw, and what you can look at the footage and see what I was taking pictures of. I mean, Jake, there were kids there that were dressed so beautiful. They had their hair done. There was a girl in the front row that had these beautiful braids. The adults, they all dressed so high end that it was like mind blowing to me, Jake. And then the atmosphere was like they were here to worship a king, or the king that we know, the God, the creator. And then while I was sitting in the audience, like the sounds of them worshiping with their natural instruments, with everything that was happening, it just was overwhelming, Jake. I just, the contrast of, these are the people that in my life I've never met where they are, and yet they are worshiping like people I've also never met before, who are, as a congregation, coming together and praising God and thanking him and worshiping him. It was such a crazy contrast to me, Jake. I literally started tearing up, and I had to walk outside and go take some pictures from the outside, because I lost it, man. Like, I'll
And
just stop
David,
there, but wow.
what is it like to be able to go back and worship? You have memories of that as a kid, and then is there anything else specifically on that day that stuck out? Because then we'll get into we'll talk a little bit about just tent maker ministry, and the kind of some of the challenges that some of these pastors have, right? To try to minister to the needs of their villages, but then also put food on the table.
Well, when I was small, I was a child. I, of course, like a lot of kids, I would be, and in church, I was not. I was more like, was this over yet? I want to get out and go play, But as an adult, just like Vadim is saying, it was. You see these people worshiping. They're very poor, and yet they are very. Their worship is very personal.
Genuine.
Very. What's that?
Genuine.
Genuine, yeah. You come back to the States after being there at a worship service, and you go to church and you look at just the incredible wealth, the cars pulling in, the beautiful churches, and yet the worship a lot of times doesn't seem as alive and real as these people who have nothing, and they don't have cars. Most of them don't even have a bicycle. It's shocking, really, when you come back to the States after being through that.
And David, the pastors here, so a little bit about the theme of the what Vadim has been working on, which is a tent making, right? Going and helping people vocationally take care of themselves and continue in the ministries that God has called them to. What are some of the challenges there in those communities with pastors who are trying to minister to needs, and but then also needing to some vocation to support themselves?
Are you asking me, or are you asking
Yeah,
Glenn?
I'm asking you, David. I know you know about this, so
Well, I don't know as much about it as Glenn because he lived over there. But I know I have tried. Like I mentioned this before, I tried to support some people both as pastors and going through the school there to get better educated. That hopefully they'll be able to use that as adults to improve their lives, because there's no infrastructure out there. There's no like in America, you can't go out and get a loan, like a student loan, or you can't. The people when they give, especially out in the villages, when they're giving their tithes, it might be a couple pieces of manioc or a bundle of bananas, or you know what I mean. They're not getting money. They're not. It's hard to explain for people who haven't been out there. But I
And
do
Glenn,
I do what I can, but it's probably not
right.
enough. But
And Glenn, in a short way, having a sawmill or other vocational programs that you've been able to kind of set up out there, how does that help young people, right, who are trying to get some education, and then also you know some pastors as well who are there with their families?
Yeah. When we had the lumber mill operational working every day, our students would provide the labor, and so they could earn their tuition fees by working at the mill. But also, what they would do is they would collect cast off scraps of lumber, something that we couldn't sell, maybe the first cut or something like that. They would take those pieces, and then they didn't have to buy, and they would make furniture out of those cast off pieces. So our students, our student pastors learned to be carpenters, and so that kind of made them bivocational. It gave them a skill that they could do in the process of being a pastor. And part of the reason for upping the pastoral school up to university level is that they had a degree that enabled them to be able to teach in the public schools, whereas just a pastoral degree did not allow them to do that, only allowed them to be a pastor. So it made them bivocational in the sense that they could be not only pastors but also teachers, and hopefully have some hands-on skills that they acquired at Congo when they went back to the village.
Glenn, I want to ask you a very kind of forthright question, which is um, how best for a Westerner, for example, or someone from outside of the culture to try to help people and support people who are at the bottom rungs of society, right? And aren't getting any help or leg ups from their own government or their own culture. And um, how best to do that in a way that is not white savior, right? We're not just coming in and making everything better because the West knows how to do it better. How best to manage that? You've been living that out in real life, and I think you've probably seen a lot of people who had somewhat good intentions, but also very maybe misguided ideas of what that looked like. Can you talk about that just for a minute? Help us understand that.
Yeah, I I think that education, like David said, is a real key component, and um, they don't, like around Congo now with the economics so bad, they don't have the resources or the possibilities to be able to earn any money for tuition fees, which aren't all that expensive. But we in the West can help out with tuition, with education, helping people to be able to go to school and earn degrees that would be able to help them. And the wood miser, the lumber mill machine was also a tremendous way that churches in America contributed a resource that allowed people to earn their own living. It wasn't just handing them out money, but providing a resource. And so things like sewing machines or generators, uh, that sort of thing can help people to be able to make a living on their own. My wife was really big in training women how to sew, and a good tailor can do really well out there making clothes for people. But a tailor needs a sewing machine, for example. Uh, David helped them out with getting cattle. So you couldn't get a loan to buy a cow, but if we would help them to be able to buy a cow, then then in theory they would be able to build up a herd, and uh, and that's one way that people are making it is by having animals, livestock. But you need that initial investment in getting that sort of thing.
Let's start with this sawmill day. As you had Sunday and went to the church, and then the sawmill day, right? This is one of the days that you were most looking forward to and excited about. Vadim, in just let's say under a minute and a half, um, you've been to a lot of sawmills already in the States, right? Big, massive sawmills. So, what was it like? How different was it? What was the setting? And then what was the day looking like as the guys are actually using the sawmill? How are they using it? And I obviously, I help a missionary with websites and things like that in Liberia, and they had to just shut down their sawmill project because of corruption and many other things. So it is not a foregone conclusion that if you get a sawmill to some place that needs it, that it's going to be used the way that we hope, right? So that this LT-15 is actually on that riverbank and running and producing lumber is a miracle in and of itself.
Okay. I'll happy to walk you through in a minute. First, you need to know that Glenn flew supplies, and specifically, he's been carrying a box all the way from his home through the airports, through all the crazy, and he brought a box that had
saw
blades in it into the village, man. Like, that's a freaking journey. And so then we got shots of him carrying it on his head and getting it out there. That's for context. But look, we get down to the river and the guys are working on reassembling. When we got there, there's cool shots that I got of the sawmill on day one was kind of sitting over by the blue container. And I got some really cool photos of them. You could show those now. And then there's they, for whatever reason, disassemble. Oh, not for whatever reason. The log was so heavy and the river is so dry that we couldn't float the log to the sawmill. So we disassembled the portable sawmill and moved it towards the log, which is wild because, like you say, Jake, usually you have these giant loaders who grab an entire truckload of logs in one fell swoop, put it where they want it, and then, process them through the mill. So we reassembled the mill on the sandbar, where usually, Glenn, you said during wet season, that would be like well above our heads in terms of we would be standing way underwater. So, Jake, David needs to share what he does in the States for his work, because when we got down to the riverbank, David's like involved with all the mechanics and like the setting it up. And I was kind of like, here's a key moment for me, Jake. I walk up to the sawmill and I see one of the locals walking towards us or towards David carrying half a spark plug. And I'm like, that's not good. That means the other half is probably stuck in the block. And I don't know if we have any more spark plugs to begin with. So,
that's a perfect part for David to interject. What was the state of the sawmill when you were at? And you're a mechanically inclined individual, it sounds like.
Yeah, currently I work for GE Aerospace, helping assemble what they call a GENX, which is a jet engine for. I actually flew on the 787-10 coming back from Brussels of Newark. I had the presence of mind to take the tail number of the aircraft. When I got to work, they were able to look up through the paperwork, and I helped build the two engines that were powering that airplane across the Atlantic. But on the sawmill, they pretty much know how to maintain it, but there's some things that they haven't had any official training mechanically. So, for instance, they needed to change the oil filter. They didn't have tools to do that, but I do a lot of my own work at home too on my cars. So I showed them how to get a Phillips screwdriver. Pardon?
I said, "Oh, do you now? You don't just build jet engines. You also do stuff at home."
Yeah. And by the way, just because I am a mechanic doesn't mean I can just look at a broken machine and fix it. It aggravates me to death that people think a mechanic can just walk up to anything and fix it, because there's a lot more to stuff than just being able to be clairvoyant or something. But anyway, I showed him how to pound a Phillips screwdriver through the housing of an oil filter and then spin it off because they don't have the tooling. And they were trying to drain the oil, and they didn't realize that it was the filler cap is on the end of a hose, and they were trying to turn the cap off, and the whole hose was spinning on the other end. So I showed them you put a backup wrench on, and simple stuff like that, just because they've never had any experience with that. It's not rocket science. Glenn brought new parts for the wood miser, and one of them was a spark plug, which they tried to put in, and they broke it because I don't think they were holding the socket straight on the wrench. It was like sideways, and it broke the porcelain on. So, Vadim, all I did is grab the old spark plug, look it over, say, well, this looks good. I mean, it's not new, but it should function. Just put this back in, and this time make sure you go straight in with a socket so you don't break this one. And well, by the way, when they took out the old spark plug, part of it I think fell into the cylinder, because I don't know if pictures of that, but because Val was trying to help them with something he had to try to fish out this little piece that was inside. But eventually we got it out and got everything together, and it ran. So,
well, Glenn and I was just looking at you guys, David, and once I saw like this craziness happening, Jake, I was like, we might not get footage of us cutting any lumber, and I need to go clear my head. So I took my long lens on my camera, and I just like walked away as far as I could on the sandbar, and I was just getting pictures from afar because I was just like, what is happening right now, man? Like, this dude's holding an oil filter with the hole in it. This guy's walking around with half a spark plug. They're like pulling it with a rope. Like, I'm like, and I saw two guys bring the actual engine over and put it on the frame, mind you. So I'm like, so David, yes, like I just was like, it's gonna be a miracle if this thing turns over and starts running. So I just walked away and was taking pictures, really cool pictures, I gotta say, like from afar with a long zoom lens. But I was a little bit afraid, a little bit skeptical.
I've had several instances going to film sawmills in Italy, in Ukraine, in the Philippines, where what I expected and what I was expecting to film was not what I found, and in some cases, a whole trip for nothing. Yeah, so I can identify with that feeling, Vadim. So, but you get the sawmill running, the blades go on, the new fresh blades, right?
So Jake, yeah, so there's a group of guys working on, and you'll see this in the footage. There's a group of guys working on with David getting the engine to work, and there's now a group of guys pushing the log to position it so that it's ready to cut. And that's where the story unfolds. Where I had David, well, not David, Nathan was sharing, like we're literally doing all this engine stuff, and here comes here comes Nathan floating down, this big white guy floating down these logs down the river, and it's the Wamba River, man. I guess Glenn, for whatever reason, they're kind of afraid to swim. Can you explain that? Like Nathan's like just like a hero with one shoe coming towards us.
Yeah, there are a lot of bad things, and could be a lot of bad things in the river.
Like,
but people don't know how to swim either. There's one tribe that knows how to swim, but the other tribe doesn't. Um, After you guys left, I got a picture of the crocodile that they caught in the Wamba River. I'll send that to you guys.
okay, hold up. I knew there was snakes and lions and stuff. I didn't know there was a gator in the water where I was swimming.
A crocodile.
Crocodile. Well, I've got gators here in Florida, so crocodile there, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
how big was it, Glenn? Like baby or?
Vadim, no skinny dipping in the Wamba River again, okay?
I'll send you a picture. It was massive.
Can I just jump in here a second? When I was growing up, I was quite the outdoors kid. I used to go out in the jungles and on the river camping. And the favorite place we used to go was down this is what we call the Three Islands camping. And I knew there was crocodiles in the river, but I never thought, I mean, Glenn will tell you that they're supposed to just be little pygmy crocodiles. And I never thought about, I heard them chirping out in the swamp and whatnot, but They told us, we went camping, by the way, after you guys left, and they were telling us that down at 3 islands, a fisherman caught this crocodile in his net. It was a big, heavy net. The crocodile drowned because it got tangled in the net, and when they pulled it in, it was just massive. And they, of course, they eat everything that any animal they'll eat. So they skinned this, but they skinned it and gave the skin to the chief of Kingbuma. But I'm thinking, this thing was, the way they described it was massive. And here I've been swimming in this river for years, not worried about. After I heard that story, I didn't want to go in the river again.
Well, I'm thinking back kind of shocked because I didn't think that was like today. I thought that was, your childhood. These gator or crocodiles.
I think what it was is the crocodiles thought this little 6-year-old running around and swimming must know something we don't, so we're going to leave him alone. Like the audacity. So Vadim, quickly, we're trying to kind of wrap up the sawmill bit.
Yeah.
So you guys saw boards coming off of logs, yeah? That day.
I mean, look, once the thing cranked up and like turned over and started running, miracles. And then from there, a couple hours later, the locals, Glenn, I observed Glenn because Glenn was not, and David, you guys were helping, but you weren't telling them what to do, which is profound to me, Jake, because that means that what Glenn did originally, how many crews, later, these guys trained themselves and is sustainable, right? That's the ultimate goal of missions, is not to hold control over whatever, a sawmill. It's to teach them and give it to them. And that's the whole way through, Jake. All of these days, I was just blown away with Glenn is just here to observe, but they're already doing it and doing it while they're making boards, and could be improved, sure, but like,
Sure.
wow.
So let's move to the Kingbuma.
David, maybe you could share. We finished breakfast and we're on our way to Kingbuma. How do we get there?
First of all, I didn't know I was going to Kingbuma that day until the day before. I thought Glenn was going to take you, so I was kind of surprised I was going. But then Glenn says, "Well, you're a child of Kingbuma," and I said, "What?" Well, it's because Pastor Joseph lives at Kingbuma along with his family. And when I was growing up, I don't know how much time we have, but he came to my parents when his first child was born. His wife had died in childbirth, and the child was starving because none of the women were lactating in the village. And my parents gave him some food for the child. And then when that was used up, he came back to ask for more. And they said, I'm just from what my parents told me. They said, we're Christians. We believe people who are able-bodied should work for their living. So we want to help you with your child, but we'd like you to come work for us, and we'll also provide you a salary. And so he agreed to that, and the child grew up to be a healthy woman, lives in Kinshasa now. But when I became probably my 11, 12, 13 years old, I was starting to go out and explore around Congo. And one day I came back and bragged to my parents that I swam from a sandbar across the Wamba and then back again with some Congolese friends. And I was real proud that I'd been able to do that, because, as you know, the current can be very swift. And I think it was Bob Smith, who was another missionary, happened to be visiting. And he said to them, there are crocodiles in that river. That was kind of a stupid thing for him to do. And the next thing you know, they brought me out to talk with them. And at the time, it was just Tata Joseph, which is Mr. Joseph, was standing there. And they told me in his language that I could still go out and camp and explore and whatnot, but he was going to go with me to keep me out of trouble. He's a teke, which are the water people. And I didn't want to do it because I didn't need a babysitter, but that was the conditions. Unless he's with you all the time, you're not going anywhere. And we became real close friends. And he would be, like I've said before, he's like a mentor. He showed me how to canoe, to fish, how to go out in the jungle and be careful of things and be observant. And it was very special. And then when we came back, my wife and I, in 2013, and I was visiting with him, one of his children told me that, your parents told you to obey our father when he told you to do stuff, and our father has told us to obey you if you ask us to do something. That's when I lost it in front of the camera. But telling you that story, because it was it's emotional. It's the bond. So anyway, I don't know if that's what you wanted me to talk about, but
Perfect. And then we entered the village of Kimbuma, and for context, now looking back, I'm realizing that wow, like, I mean, Jake, I don't know how to describe this to you, but what happened in the short number of days that we were there, our crew was there from Koval, like, it's absolutely insane. Like, you would need a large team of producers and executives and directors and script writers to capture all of the content that we got in such a jam-packed schedule. We arrive and the story unfolds. David, just explain. We ate with the chief. We went to the spring. We saw the church. Like, so much happened, Jake, that like I can think quick, man, but like it was just happening.
So, David, can you give us some context for kind of how that day went a bit, and some of the impact that Vadim is talking about? And then we'll probably try to wrap up this particular conversation with the Kimbuma as kind of the climax, and knowing also that Vadim and his team are working on going through 8 terabytes of footage and bringing the story to life. And your guys' story, Glenn's story, I know Vadim wants to do another one with featuring Rita and her work and her impact that he's told me about. So, David, can you give us a little bit more about what was the significance of these events that happened in this village, and some of the needs there, and some of the passions and desires of your heart?
well, just a side note, uh, Vadim has kind of mentioned that I think he was overwhelmed when he got there. His original idea of what the film would be like kept changing. So we were on the way to Kimbuma. He says to me, "Hey, you think they could chop a tree down for us, or do they have a tree they just chopped down?" And I was kind of irritated with him because I was thinking, uh, I don't know if I said this to him or not, but you should have asked this a couple days ago, so we would have given them time to do something, not when we're already there. But I brought it up to the guys from Kimbuma as we were going across the river, and so they were talking about it, I think, while we were visiting Kimbuma. We got to Kimbuma. By the way, Nathan went ahead of us. I'm not sure why he got separated from us, but we got to Kimbuma and we couldn't find Nathan. Well, for some reason, the chief of Kimbuma has taken a liking to Nathan, because when we got there, we found out some people had come and gotten Nathan and taken him to the chief's house, and they were hanging out. And they went to get him once we got to Kimbuma to join our group again. And yeah, we met Pastor Joseph, and then we went into a mud hut and we had some lunch. Vadim was there, Val, Nathan, I, Pastor Joseph, and then Vadim kept asking, "Can we go see this? Can we do that?" And we ended up going we saw their grade school and met the teacher, and then we went to the church, which I think you've seen pictures of, and saw the inside of the church. And there was a big truck in the village, which is unusual, but it was there to pick up corn and manioc to take back to the city. That's how they make some of their money. And then you guys went off to see the spring where they don't have running water in the village, obviously. They're mud huts. So they go down in the valley to get water and bring up in buckets. And while you were gone, I flew the drone around Kimbuma and took some movies of that. And the kids all just loved those drones. So they were all hanging out with me, watching what was going on. And then, when you guys got back, of course, we got the pictures of Vadim doing gymnastics on the bars up on the top of the truck, the cage with the driver. That was just spontaneous, We these truck drivers, we didn't know, we never met him before, but Vadim's acting like they're their next door neighbor or something, So, and then when we got done with, when we finished with Kimbuma, the guy said we got some trees. They were first going to take us upstream to look at a tree that'd been cut, but then they said, well, we could actually see one if we go downstream, which is toward Kikongo. So we got in 2 canoes and headed downriver. And first, and this was not what I had expected. We went off into the jungle, and they had cut a big tree down and cut it into 4 pieces, and were making dugout canoes out of them. 2 of the sections had already been made into canoes and been put in the river, and that was totally spontaneous. And then we went a little further down, and we found the tree that Vadim wanted to see that was going to end up being milled into boards. And then while we went on to Kikongo, you stayed because you and Val wanted to have the when the sun is just setting. What are they? The golden hour, I think they call it. You want to take pictures during the golden hour, and I think you had Gaylor, which is one of Pastor Joseph's sons, starring in that. And I wasn't there when all that went down.
So, kind of to wrap this up for today, there's 3 things I'd like to do, which is kind of to have Glenn summarize how the trip went from his perspective as being your guide and taking you back. Also, I'd like Vadim to tell us, I know you have big plans for what is coming next from all this, but I'd like you to tell the listeners what to expect next, the next thing to expect, not the things coming after, but just the next thing. And then I would also like each of you quickly just to say, for listeners, why should we care about what's happening in Kikongo with a sawmill or a school or a hospital, and the bigger story that we need to keep in mind about how the wood world connects all of us worldwide, right? In the US, we have this very developed forestry industry and all this stuff, but forestry is very much applicable and impacts people in Kikongo. Here in Southeast Asia, right? As we try to take care of our God-given natural resources and use it to the betterment of his children, right?
Jake, I think I apologize here, but I would ask that we take 10 minutes and finish the hospital day today, because I'm going to have a crazy travel schedule, and so will Glenn and David. We just won't be able to connect together. I would suggest that we take the 10 minutes, go through the hospital bit, and then on our way out, then we just finish the episode and just be done with it. Okay, so we wrap the Kimbuma day, we get the shots that we need to create an opening sequence, we get back to the village, have dinner. The next day, this is now the hospital day. Glenn, give us some context about why is the hospital, as you said, is one of the top 3 things important to a mission, or to that mission specifically.
Yeah, I think when you have young converts, um, the fear is that they will go back to their sorcery, go back to their traditional beliefs. Um, so when they get sick, they would go back to the witch doctor or something like that. And so missions always went hand in hand with medical, so that we would provide medical care, not only look out for the spiritual, but also look out for the physical aspect of the individuals. And so missions has always associated doctors along with evangelists and church workers. And so Kikongo was a model of that. The first missionaries that came to Kikongo built a thatched house that doubled as a medical dispensary, and it just grew from there. Then there was a medical dispensary, and then they brought in a missionary nurse, and then later a missionary doctor, and a hospital was built, and so now you have um, a medical infrastructure around Kikongo, so that when people get sick, they come to the church center and they have a chaplain and they pray, and they deal with their physical issues and don't have to revert back to sorcery and finding out who the witch is and start burning down houses and making false accusations about people. So the medical and education and the church all go hand in hand and have traditionally been that way.
Jake, so this is another profound moment because I'm telling you, like, it would take an army of Hollywood people to plan out this trip. Glenn, when we arrived at the hospital, Dr. Daniel was in charge showing us, and we got invited by their staff. I want to quickly skip to the moment that I didn't even plan for, Jake. We didn't expect the main character who was chopping that tree down the day before at Kimbuma is Pastor Joseph's son, Gaylor, that David just mentioned. Gaylor's older brother almost died the days we were there because of an appendix. And the crazy thing is, Gaylor was visiting his brother wearing the same clothing that he was chopping the tree down from the day before. Unstaged, unscripted, unplanned. Glenn, unpack that for me. What was Gay like? Theoretically, it makes sense. Just walk me through what we saw with Gaylor's older brother and make sense of it, please.
Well, Gaylor, we arrived at the hospital thinking that this was going to be just an impersonal visit to the hospital, but it turned out to be way more personal because the guy that we had been with, his brother, had just had surgery, and without the surgery, he would have died. And so here we were in the hospital that saved his life, and providentially, there was a doctor who has brought his family to Kikongo, where the doctor could have been making a living in the city, but chose to live in a rural setting and hardly getting paid at all because the patients coming in don't have any funds to pay their medical fees with. And so you have this dedicated doctor who's saving people's lives every day with very little financial remuneration for what he's doing. So we saw the importance of the hospital very in a very personal way, uh, having Gaylor's brother there.
Yeah, and I mean, Glenn, context. I heard there's no electricity right now. The generator that's in the back at the top of the hill is broken. There's no electricity. They're still doing surgeries, saving Gaylor's older brother's life while we were there is profound. Like, that's unscripted. That cannot just even happen. And yet it did. And then we saw the surgery facility, the sterilization unit that they used to like burn wood, Jake, burn wood to boil this thing that looks like a giant kettle with all this stuff. And then that sterilizes the equipment with no electricity in the Congo. And there's photos of that. I'm just looking into this pot and it's just like, what is happening right now? Like, wood again provides the heating energy to sterilize equipment. There's babies born. There's a way that they're getting water supplied. This was the only place in the village where I saw a faucet or like a hose spigot looking thing where they were refilling water from a big cistern that we went and toured. Jake, you can fill all this in later, but I mean, we're talking with Gaylor, we're talking with Dr. Daniel and his staff. There was like so much content that you can go back and reference. And then there's a conversation that happens with the administrator, the main doctor, myself, Gaylor, and you, Glenn. What were we talking about at the top of the hill? If you remember, just kind of summarize what we saw and experienced that whole day, I guess.
The I'm not sure what you were referring to. The top of the hill, the generator.
Well, we were by the generator. There was two conversations that Jake, you can go back and look for that give a lot of context to this conversation. But Glenn, we were by the cell phone tower at the top of the hill near the generator, and we had conversations. I believe it was about Gaylor because he's in my pictures I'm looking at here. And then we walked down the to the middle of the hospital under the cover, and sitting down, we talked deeper about the hospital. I mean, just kind of summarize quickly, why is the hospital important? Is it still functional? Did you expect it to be functional when we arrived?
Um, when I left 3 years ago, there was a real conflict in the hospital because the last doctor had been run out for corruption or something like that, and so I didn't know if we would even have a doctor there or not. But one of the missionaries is the medical coordinator for all of the Baptist hospitals, and she assured me that yes, at Kikongo, when we go there, there will be a doctor. So we were kind of pleasantly surprised that we would have a doctor, and that was reassuring to me, having all these visitors, these expatriate visitors, that there would be some sort of medical care uh, while we were visiting at Kikongo. But also think how reassuring it is for the villagers to have, they would walk, all day or multiple days to come to the hospital, and to find out that there is no doctor. How disappointing that would be, but how encouraging it is to know that yes, there is a doctor on duty, and Kikongo has trained medical personnel. And in fact, there's even a nursing school right there at Kikongo. So some of the people that we met with on that first day, around that big room, were some of the nurses that had been trained at Kikongo. Others who are trained there are in the villages. When Vadim talks about the 30 villages, there are way more than 30 villages around, but there are 30 villages that have a church and schools and a medical dispensary. That's what makes a church center. And so the hospital there furnishes nurses who work in the villages, who would examine a patient and say, we can treat you here in the village, or if it surpasses their skill or expertise, then they would have the competence to say, okay, you need to go to Kikongo. And so it'd be a triage system that would send patients to Kikongo. So
And there's
the
no
medical,
ambulance. There's no
no
ambulance. How did
no
Gaylor's crew
ambulance.
get there?
No ambulance. So uh, you would have your walking wounded, or else someone would be strapped onto a motorcycle and and taken to Kikongo by motorcycle. Yeah.
Glenn, water is quite critical for a hospital to function, to wash out wounds, to do all kinds of things. Where did the water come from for the
Yeah,
hospital?
you can't run a hospital without water. And so back even in the early days, there's a hydraulic ram system that pumps water up to the cisterns. So they fill up a cistern that then provides the head for providing water for those spigots. And there's a forest right there next to the station called Mfindansiku, which means the the, uh, the protected forest. And so you have this watershed that's being protected, so that the water continues to run. And one of the disappointing aspects of going there was finding that the forest had been burned, and there was even people that were trying to plant fields in that area. So one of our contributions was to encourage the hospital that it's their role to protect uh, that watershed, that forested area, because we don't want the water to run dry. We don't want the water to get polluted. So that was one of the significant contributions that we made unwittingly, was encouraging the hospital to make sure that that place is protected.
Glenn,
Uh,
and I think that's appropriate. We've got a lot of conversation for Jake to go back to look at all the things that happen at the hospital. It's very encouraging that that hospital is functional today. And I think that the last key thing we talked about there is that we already touched on it, but the university. And Glenn, with that theme of what you were just saying, like we wanted to encourage them. You asked me to speak at the university. I thought it was going to be a small group. It turned out to be a significant group. On the last day when we woke up, uh, you translated into French, I think, was it, Glenn?
huh?
My message for the wood world globally through this project, Jake, is that God is good, wood is good, and Kikongo missions like Kikongo are really good. And so, Glenn, could you summarize, I guess, why, and what was the message that we were trying to get across there?
So at the university, we're training not just pastors, but other professionals in different fields, such as French, such as computer science. So these will be the leaders in the rural community. And the first day that we were there, we were interrupted in our filming because the government official had arrived and was controlling who were these foreigners who were coming into his territory. And what surprised me was that the government chief, the official who was there to meet us, was our former student who had just graduated from the university. And so these officials who had been impersonal, who were harassing us in the past, now the chief is our own graduate whom we had worked with in the church. He was from Kindundu, which is a village that's across the valley there. We'd worked with him as a lay leader in the church, and then as a student, and then became the political administrator of the area. That was a profound moment to me, that the government official wasn't somebody that we needed to be afraid of, but was somebody who we can trust, and someone who we'd worked with in the past. And because of the university, had had gotten this authority given to him. And he's not the only one that's given these government positions. There's another guy that who is also in a high government official. So it just shows the value of the university in raising up leaders who have been at Kikongo, who have heard the gospel, who have heard about taking care of the environment, who are trying to manage the country in a way that's not contributing to the corruption and just selfishness, but a way that's looking out for the whole community. So that was a profound moment to me, that our graduate was the chief that we had formerly been afraid of, and no longer need to be afraid of him because he's our colleague.
That is incredible. And so the
Yeah,
university, therefore, makes a big impact. And that is why
yeah,
you said education is one of the key things. You want the people to learn how to read fundamentally, but also to
yeah.
be able to grow.
To be leaders,
That's
to be
profound.
Christian leaders in the community.
And now that's actually significant because it's not just they get some kind of education, they actually are able to get some kind of diploma and certificate, and that
Oh
sets
yeah,
them up for personal professional success.
yes, very much so. Yeah,
Okay, Jake, you can find all this content in all of our content. I'd like to point out, you asked what's next. Well, at the end of after I was able to give a presentation, or I'm not even sure what you call it, preaching, Glenn. I mean, I brought this to this conversation. Glenn approached me afterwards and gave me this little envelope of, it's just a piece of paper that's folded. And it's profound to me, Jake, because in here, uh look, there's these Congo francs that they gave me. And so there was it was a gift. And so what I realized is several things. One is God is good to me, you know? Like I didn't expect anything, and they said it's a gift for preaching from Unibach right on the
uh,
envelope.
and there's a Bible verse on it, Galatians.
It says Galate.
Yeah, Galate. That's what they call the gift to the speaker, to the preacher. The
And they said
preacher,
to Vadima. They added an A at the end of my name. They don't like my name. They added.
all African words end in a vowel. You can't have an African word that ends in a consonant. So Vadim becomes Vadima.
I usually just introduce myself as V going forward. I just say, "Hey, my name is Vadim," but I just go by V. See, conveniently, I wore a shirt that has a V on it right there. But, anyways, the funny thing, no, it wasn't funny. It was profound that
Yeah,
Jake, that I received this gift, and it's symbolic to me more than it is, of course, the money value of it. But Glenn, what happened next, and this ties into Jake, what I see as the future is there needs to be another trip because we didn't touch on so many things. There's so much depth to the story. And Glenn, one of those things is, I believe, is your wife was missing. Rita Chapman
yeah,
wasn't there. There was a building that had Rita Chapman written all over it.
yeah, yeah.
And Glenn, then touch on why was the library profound to you? In fact, Jake, there weren't many moments. There was one particular moment where Glenn teared up and got emotional, and that was when we entered the library. Glenn, what was that moment for you like?
Well, Rita, she is skilled in so many ways, and not only did she work with the women, the pastors' wives, and the church, the women of the church, but she was also set up the library, and took this cluster of old books and established, classified them according to the Dewey Decimal System, and arranged them in such an aesthetic way. And we have arguably the best library in the country, just from books that she accumulated and arranged and structured it so that you could come and work, and there was a librarian, and the books were computerized. A librarian who would get the books that people would be interested in and register them, and so it's controlled. Whereas other libraries in the Congo, the books just disappear. But when I walked into that library after 3 years, it was exactly the same as the way Rita left it. It was so well taken care of, and we had supported the guy who had been who we had left in charge of the library, and that was profound to me because they had valued the resource that they had, and it was still being used. And I just saw Rita all over that library. Her tender care in putting up the decorations and the cloth and the arrangement and all that was so aesthetically done and so valued and taken care of. That's why that was so profound.
What is just the next thing that people should be expecting?
Okay.
There's other things, but
Yeah.
I don't want
Well.
with this podcast. I want them to know. Okay, within a couple months,
Yeah.
they should be expecting to see what.
Okay. Well, the next steps I have it actually written down, so I'll just read you what I have written down. There will be a landing page and a website that we will put up to really explain the tent maker movement, is what I'm calling it now. It's no longer just a film project. It's no longer, I mean, there's literally more behind what I'm seeing. So we've got a team working here, putting together a little website. We will on that website show photography of our trip. Jake, you and the people that are working on, you're working on a vlog for us on YouTube. I think that's one of the key things. There is going to be a of all the footage that we shot professionally, that's going to be a pilot, is what we're expecting it to be. And then we're also behind the scenes working on a pitch deck, because actually this whole project, or the filming of what we saw, I believe is just a pilot to a documentary series of films. It could be one documentary film. There's a lot of ways it could be sliced and diced. So we're gonna, as we're digging into the footage, we will be evaluating what's the appropriate route to take. We believe that we could bring a tremendous value for investors, if we were to go that route. It's possible to go in so many different directions with this project, Jake. And right now, it's just at the
For
beginning of
most,
its infancy stage.
right. So there's a lot of interesting ideas and plans of taking this to the next level. But at the same time, for the casual viewer who's really inspired by this conversation and can't wait to see all this footage, this pilot might be available online in a few months, or what do you think?
Yeah, it kind of depends on which route we take. We want to enter European film festivals. We want to enter the United States film festivals and in Canada. So it depends. Some of those film festivals require us to show that pilot or this piece, premiere it at one of these specifically events. So I would say the vlog should be available on YouTube soon, um, and the whole film it'll take some time. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to do. I think that eventually, Glenn, if you and Rita go out to or start planning the next trip to the Congo, please let us know, because we'd like to send another crew with you out there potentially. So there's a lot, Jake, but specifically watch out for a vlog on YouTube. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe, because then that way you'll get notifications when we post stuff, and watch out for the vlog. I don't know what we're gonna call it yet, but it's this tent maker Congo, Africa, boots on the ground, and you'll see in it the travels to and from. You'll see the weeds of the craziness that unfolds there. There's moments on there that are really profound that you'll see and experience for yourself.
Well, David, thank you for being on the call today. Glenn, of course, you took a chance to try to bring a camera crew to the Congo. And what would you both say in a few words? How do you feel after this trip, having had a camera crew with um, some passionate people along, right? How do you feel? What were some of the fears at the beginning of taking these crew with you, and then how do you feel like at the end? What were some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I was fearful about so openly having a camera crew. In fact, someone who had recently filmed for a church out there had told me how they'd been questioned so much at the airports. In fact, when Val and I arrived at the airport, Val was well. We were going through the airport, and he was right behind me. And all of a sudden, I looked back, and he wasn't there. And so I had to retrace my steps. And he was in a government office, and they said, "You've got camera equipment. You know what are you here for?" And they were getting ready to interrogate him, but uh, I went into the language, the local language, and I just said, "I'm a missionary, and we're getting ready to celebrate 100 years of missionary work in Congo, and they're here to celebrate that with me." And and that diffused the situation. And I even was ready to hand the guy $10 as we walked out of the office, and he wouldn't take it. And that never have has an official refused to take uh, money. You know, it was obviously a gift. It wasn't corruption.
Sure.
I wasn't bribing him beforehand to let the stuff, but we had already been released, and he wouldn't take it. He saw the
Mm.
value of what we were intending to do, and then so that was Kinshasa. But at Kikongo, it felt very comfortable having the camera crew there to film that. But to me, it was just such an honor, to be able to go back after 3 years and having these guys really interested, a personal interest in my story, in my returning. And I'm hoping that the video isn't about me, but it was an honor to have these guys uh, along with me. It was an honor for me in front of Kikongo to be able to bring four other guys with me to say, we validate Kikongo, we validate this place. You guys are special, you guys are important. And to prove that you're important, here are these filmers who are coming to film what's going on here, to show that they are
Very
a
important.
special place. Yeah.
David, what were your thoughts and maybe your reservations of having a bunch of trigger happy camera guys coming along to the Congo?
Well, it was similar to Glenn's when it came to the how are the officials going to look at us bringing cameras in. And I always wear I have a drone that I bring, a cheap drone that I take movies with, that I get nervous just bringing that in, and yet it all went smoothly. And it was fun to watch Vadim and Val. Every day they were like reinventing what they wanted to do, and then Val was coming up with different ways to film and take pictures. And but one thing I slightly off I'd like to bring up is I I always bring a lot of stuff with me, and then some stuff is already intentional gifts, and other things I'm going to just leave with people who need it. And I had brought for my personal use, a mag flashlight, which is like a high-end aluminum case flashlight. The beam can be focused out or narrowed in, an LED light, very bright. And by the end of the trip, I still had it in my person because it didn't feel like the right person had needed it. And the day before we were going to leave, I ran into the doctor from the hospital, who I knew who he was, but I'd never actually talked with him. And he wanted to know how I was doing. I was on a path in Congo. I said, well, I've got a cough and I've got ear infections. I'm not feeling well, and I'm kind of worried about how my trip back to the States is going to go. He says, oh, okay. I'm going to come over tonight with some medicine. And that night, it was dark, obviously. He comes up to the house. He's using his cell phone light as a flashlight to find his way. And he comes in, he's got a bunch of medication. He's very, take this much tonight and this much tomorrow and so on and so forth. But I had been praying. I mean, it sounds so simple. Like, you guys might not think it's a big deal, but God, am I supposed to just bring this mag light home with me? That's what I was thinking the whole last couple days. When I saw him walk up to the door using his cell phone light as a flashlight, and this is the doctor, and he probably is using this when he goes to people's homes when they're sick at night to try to see what's going on. He is the guy. He is the guy. And I showed him the mag light, and I showed him how to focus it, and it is just blindingly bright. And I said, this is for you. And I showed him there's a spare bulb in the back end, and it just takes 2 D-cell batteries. And he was very grateful. And so it's like I understood and he understood. They don't have electricity. And this simple thing was, this is the guy God wanted me to give this light to, is what I'm trying to say. And you guys may think that's all BS, but to me, I didn't know. I'd given so much other stuff away. And this is like, it's not a cheap flashlight. Am I supposed to bring it home or not? And yet last night, here it is. This is for you. So that, like, to cap the trip off for me, that was it. It was at that point, I'm done. I'm ready to go home.
Well, lots of good things to come. Thanks for all the stories. And we could have made this easily into an 8-hour. And maybe we will. Maybe this will just be the first of a series. So thank you guys.